afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the City Club Forum. My name is Herb Kamm, and I have the honor of serving as president of the City Club. There's an old saying that good things come in small packages, and we are about to see and hear an affirmation of that in the presence of our speaker this afternoon, a distinguished ethnic lady come to a distinguished ethnic community. Barbara Mikulski is serving her third term in the House of Representatives. She comes from a long line of hard-working Polish immigrants. Ms. Mikulski served on the City Council of Baltimore before she was elected to the House of Representatives in 1976, and she was re-elected in 1978 with no less than 90% of the vote. She began as a social worker with the elderly in Baltimore's anti-poverty program, and she later became professor of sociology at Loyola College. As an activist in neighborhood organization, she was elected in 1971 as an independent to the Baltimore City Council with a strong grassroots campaign. Ms. Mikulski serves on the Health and Transportation subcommittees of the Commerce Committee and on the Merchant Marine and Fisheries Committee. She's also a member of the Executive Committee of the Congresswomen's Caucus. Our subject for us this afternoon, the impact of the Reagan budget on women and children. It is indeed a pleasure to introduce to you Congresswoman Barbara Mikulski of Baltimore and Maryland.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for those nice words of introduction. When I arrived in Cleveland, I sensed a certain pull in the atmosphere, and I wondered, was it due solely to the impact of the federal budget on the problems that you're facing? But no, as I talked to some of the people, whether it was the gentleman doing some of the maintenance services at the Holiday Inn or the people here, there's a certain pull because of your retirement, Mr. President, and I want you to know that you're very well loved here. When you say that good things come in small packages, I just want you to know I used to be taller until redistricting. And if I, in my remarks, seem excessively animated, which is a buzzword for being hyper, it's because my own state Senate is voting on my redistricting plan this afternoon, and I hope they're not trying to trim those 90% of those voters that I get. When I say excessively animated, that means I'm ready to go off the wall wondering what they're doing in Maryland. However, I had spoken at the Cleveland City Club once before when I was a member of the Baltimore City Council. And at that time, the audience was smaller and I was bigger. And I'm pleased to see that today there's been this nice turnout, really very substantive turnout for me. And I want you to know that when I spoke here, I was 40 pounds heavier. And I tell you, when I come to speak again, I'll be 30 pounds lighter then. But I want to thank you for asking me here today, because it's truly an honor to speak at such a well-known and well-respected club. I have a fond place in my heart for Cleveland. Some of my best friends are here. This Cleveland caucus that you have in Congress, I must say, is really something to behold. The very able Lou Stokes battling for you on the Appropriations Committee. The newcomer that you sent with the Congressman Dennis Eckhart. And, of course, my own dearest, deepest friend in Congress, Congresswoman Mary Rose Okar. And I just want you to know that every day, in every way, they're out there working for the good of Cleveland. I feel like I know Cleveland partly through my very deep friendship with Congresswoman Okar, and partly because I see Cleveland and many of its problems that are faced very similar to my own hometown of Baltimore. Like Cleveland, Baltimore is a working town. It's what I call a gritty city, dependent on industry, suffering from all the ills and ailments that come from being a frost belt city. Like Congresswoman Okar, I got into national politics after working in the city council. And I got into the city council after working as a community organizer, trying to stop a 16-lane highway coming through my neighborhood that was going to take the homes of several hundred older people without giving any relocation benefits or any kind of consideration. I got into politics because I organized the Hell No, We Won't Go committee. That was out of St. Stanislaus Church. We called it something else, but that was the essence of it. What I learned from organizing neighborhoods to stop that highway, and what I learned from my days in the city council, was the value of solving problems by going to the people and asking them, what do you need, rather than sitting around theorizing about methods and means. That I turned to the people to find out what was on their mind and how were they living, and to take a look at their day-to-day struggle, rather than calling up think tanks to take a look at statistical descriptions of what it is they do. And it is that ability to say, let me picture your situation, or show it to me personally, is that I find sorely lacking in our Congress, in our government, and in all of our major institutions. We've become impersonal, mechanical, and dehumanized. And it shows. It shows in our national policy, and it shows in our foreign policy, and it shows in the way we treat the precious resources of women and children in this country. The government is no longer responsive to the real needs of its people. And one of the most fundamental values that we have, the value of saving lives, is no longer a national priority. I want to talk to you today about saving lives and why it is no longer a national priority, and what can be done to make us reach for that ideal again, that corny, cliched goal of saving lives and saving a way of life. What I want to talk about is the impact of the budget on women and children, but within the context of something called the reconceptualization of politics, because it is the way that we think about a problem that then determines not only what we do, but either mobilizes us or deters us from organizing for action. There was a time in this country not long ago when there were corner grocery stores, when grandparents and grandchildren lived a block apart, and when the size of the federal deficit was small enough to be thought about. But now, in the year of 1982, and in the past decades, we have gone macro. Macro. And what does going macro mean? Well, we look at problems in macro terms, too big to be real, and then we speak in abstract terms, too personal to seem real, and therefore immobilizes us from acting. The mind cannot conceive of a $90 billion deficit. Try to picture it. What does it mean? Can you even picture 90 billion bucks all stacked up? No. The mind cannot conceive of enough nuclear weapons to destroy the entire planet 6 times over. Picture it going once. Picture it going twice. Picture it 3 times, and I think you can say that the bidding has stopped. The mind cannot equate the term foreign policy with the reality of a 4-year-old little kid being killed in a crossfire in El Salvador. And the more abstract our language becomes, the more we are able to hurt people and not feel it. Conversely, that means the less joy we feel when we do help them. It is the difference of feeling. That's the difference between the foot soldier who has to look at the man he kills and the pilot who pushes the button to drop the napalm. It is the difference between the social worker who personally carries an abused child from a broken home and the person who processes the paperwork for the case in an office miles away. The less you feel, whether it is joy or sadness, the further away you are from the problem, and the less responsive you become. Distance, whether psychological or physical, makes us capable of greater cruelty, greater indifference, and greater injustice. The same is true of institutions and of governments. With the flourish of the pen in the marble halls of our federal government, we cut social programs. And just by doing it with the pen and sitting in those big, pompous committee rooms, we do not have to feel what we do, we do not have to picture what we do, and we don't have to face what we do. What do those cuts mean in terms of lives? What does a soaring deficit mean in terms of individual lives? What does a worldwide stockpile of 50,000 nuclear missiles mean to the people who live with that threat every day of their lives? Let me tell you what it means to my constituents, and probably to many of you as well. Cuts in funding for the elderly and for children. What does that mean? We hear $1 billion here, $2 billion there. We spend $1 billion on aid to handicapped children. We're going to reduce that to $60 million. What does that mean? We're going to, the proposals are to alter the issue of Medicare and Medicaid, in which we will cut out optional programs. In my community, that's prescription drugs. Now, I've outlined to you just some policies. Now, what does that mean? It's dull, it's stale, it has no heart to it. But I'll tell you what it means in my neighborhood, down by the docks in Baltimore, talking to my folks. It means that there is a family in which a deaf child, there will be no more eligible funds to buy a hearing aid for that deaf child. It means that one of my elderly neighbors across the street from St. Stanislaus Church told me that she's going to have to start diluting her insulin because she doesn't have the money to pay for it. It means that one of my great guys who are automobile workers, in the rage and frustration and humiliation of a man without a job, because he couldn't go and kick our import policy, turned and beat his wife and his children. This is the meaning of the cuts and the budget, not the millions and billions shuffled and shifted from one chart to another, not the economic models, not the economic theories, and the lack of connection applies to all of our national problems. We've lost direction. We can stockpile nuclear bombs because we never see them, and we have never seen what they can do. And to most of us, there are just so many numbers on the scoreboard of one country's ego versus another. I'm for a strong defense, but we've blindly equated the pursuit of gadgetry with the pursuit of excellence. Our planes need spare parts, so we respond by building an MX missile. Our fleet needs to be overhauled, so we finance an outmoded B-1 bomber. And we call this folly a defense policy. We call foreign policy pumping $250 million in a Central American country called El Salvador that only has 5 million people in it who are at war with one another. That's not foreign policy. That's a federally funded massacre. We call domestic policy a series of measures designed to assault the most basic and cherished unit we have, the family. We have an administration that claims to be pro-life and pro-family, but the rhetoric makes a lie of the facts. It is the government, if the government truly wants to nourish the family, it must give a family what it needs. Meeting the needs of a family is not some mysterious process. It's not some obscure formula. It's very simple. You find out what a family needs to help themselves by talking to mothers, fathers, and children. And here's what I found talking to families. The breadwinner needs a job. Now, if we think the breadwinner and all breadwinners need a job, that means we should talk in terms of a full employment policy in this country. The children need an education. That means we should have an educational policy in this country. They need a chance to be healthy and an assurance that old age won't mean poverty. And that means the stabilization of our Social Security system and a policy for health care for children, adults, and old people. They need to believe that there is a chance for a future to be brighter and that their children will have a better life. They need the right to be assured that they will not be obliterated in a nuclear holocaust. And this administration and the majority of the members of Congress have given them none of these things. Employment is at a record high. Cleveland and Baltimore is in the same fix. The steel industry's down, the auto industry's down, the housing industry's down. Every major indicator of economic health shows disease. In my state alone, as of this morning, there are 206,000 people out of work. Breadwinners who've lost their dignity, lost their hope, and are now in the process of losing their homes. I have a lot of auto workers and steel workers in my district. Many of them have been laid off. Yet last month, 3,400 Mitsubishi trucks were unloaded at my port of Baltimore, bought by the Department of Defense. Unemployed automobile workers moonlighting at a factory that undercoats these trucks called me up because they were putting on the undercoating and putting the American decal on these trucks. Our Defense Department is buying Japanese trucks while our auto workers have no jobs. Now, there's something wrong about that. I don't call that a government that cares about the family or jobs or even national defense. I call that a government that is promoting unemployment and that has forsaken its sense of responsibility. I can't call a government pro-family when because a pro-family administration would not cut programs for prenatal nutrition. It does not cut federally aided daycare that allows mothers and fathers to work, and it doesn't cut summer feeding programs for poor children. Recently, I spoke with a group of nurses who told me that poor women are waiting longer and longer to seek prenatal care because of the funding cuts. Often they end up delivering in the emergency room. And you know, and I know, that that is not only dangerous medicine, but it is very bad economics. Last year, as I said, more than $1 billion was cut from the $7 billion budget for aid to dependent children. Now, we hear a lot about welfare, and somehow or another you get the feeling that everybody on welfare is sitting around drinking pina coladas waiting for the next check to come in. That's somehow or another the image that's out there, and that it is all these slothful people who are just ready and able to go into those high-tech computer industries that are just flourishing in Cleveland, Baltimore, and Detroit. Well, 68% are too young to drink because they're children. 7 million of those are children. They depend on AFDC for life, and so do their parents. 4 out of 5 of them are headed by single women. They're not freeloaders. Of every 10 mothers on AFDC, 4 are caring for preschool children. 3 are working. 1 is disabled, and 2 aren't seeking work because in most instances they've given up because there are no jobs for people with their skills. AFDC helps them get by a rough time. I could go through the statistics, but let's take a look again about what it means in human terms. There's a woman living right here in Ohio who decided to quit her job and go on welfare after she found out that under the new AFDC rules, she would lose $9 in food stamps and her Medicaid card if she kept on working. But where she was working, she had no health insurance or plan to care for her children. By not working, she gets $1 a month. That's a big incentive to go on welfare. But the important thing is that her children get health care. And because they are sick, she needs that. And it pays her to stay home and do that. That woman has 3 children. She gets no support from her husband. She's worked all of her life. And she told me that that painful decision, that humiliating decision to her, was to do what was the best for the family. Are we so impersonal, so blind, so callous, that we turn our backs on children? Is a missile more important than milk? Is a tax credit for a mega corporation more vital than Salk vaccine? Can we afford to stop taking care of the children? Think about what we may lose. When we talk about eliminating prenatal care, when we talk about cutting back on aid to the handicapped, when we talk about phasing out the federal funds in education and eliminating programs like Title I, what does that mean? Well, think for a moment about the child born without the benefits of prenatal care. Think about a child born blind or deaf because the mother didn't have proper care. That child might have been a great scientist, a magnificent musician. Think about the funds to educate that child might have been cut, and he or she may have to be institutionalized for life. And think about the children who are fortunate enough, who are born well and healthy. Will they have an education? We've cut that financial aid. And in cutting that financial aid, it means that a poor kid no longer can dream about being a doctor or a nurse. Where will we turn for help? Where will we turn for help when you and I are old? Where will they be? Where will be the engineers, the lawyers, the chemists, the doctors, the nurses, the teachers, who are now turning to us as children and say, I want to learn, help me. I want to live, help me. I have the right to a future. Help me get one. Every democratic society needs a literate population. Our greatest threat is ignorance. People often talk about the threat of communism. I believe our greatest defense against communism is a population that can read, write, make decisions for itself, and have opportunities for a job and a decent life. Our greatest defense is a people that can go beyond their own personal experiences for information. And as long as an individual can read and have access to facts, there is no way to control his or her mind or his or her future. It is an education that will help us create a national climate in which humanism flourishes. Now, I know now these days humanism has a bad name. Why, I really don't know. I thought it was a desirable goal to care about other people. But we don't have humanism now. There's no humanism in an administration that recently appointed an Assistant Secretary for Social Services, a woman who believes that the issue of domestic violence, child abuse, and wife battering is too trivial to be given federal consideration. We also see that same lack of humanism in the proposed appointment of an anti-Semitic man as the Assistant Secretary for Legislation in the Department of Health and Human Services. And we see it in the President Reagan's pet, Phyllis Schlafly, who recently said that women who do not have children should be denied Social Security benefits. Now, I don't know what that says about me, Mary Rose Okar, nuns, and other good people who've dedicated their life. We are our own worst enemies when we stop thinking about these in human terms, and when we dismiss them as quirks of the system rather than the symptoms of a greater ill. We sabotage ourselves and our future when we become callous to the rights of women, to children, to the unemployed, to the poor, and to the old. Someone once said there should be a special place in hell reserved for those who look the other way when evil triumphs in its pursuit of inhumanity. It is our right to take back the language. We must take back the language from the right wing, the language of the family, the home, the neighborhood, and the community. We are the traditionalists. And it is our duty to put that language back into our laws, back into our programs, and back into our policies. It is our duty to take those basic values and to make them political. The basic values of saving lives and saving a way of life. It is our duty to visualize and to organize. And we can do it. We can do it. And then how can we do it in our own way? Well, first of all, I know that Cleveland has a reputation for being a marvelous town for grassroots organizing. I would encourage those grassroots organizing efforts. I would also encourage people to volunteer. Volunteer in a way that then shows that we can do many other things. But in the process of volunteering as Girl Scout leaders and big brothers and little brothers, and going to those cancer wards where the children are who have leukemia, and also helping out with senior citizens, we need to remember that volunteer programs are never a substitute for an adequate public policy on those issues. So that for those of you who volunteer delivering Meals on Wheels or who have family members who do so, I salute you for doing that. But a volunteer delivering Meals on Wheels does save a life. But a volunteer delivering Meals on Wheels is not a substitute for an adequate, stable Social Security program and a catastrophic health insurance program to help people in their old age. That volunteering for boys and Girl Scouting and being in some way substitute parents is not an adequate substitute for an educational program in which all boys and girls can learn to read and write and pursue intellectual opportunities according to their ability. And that doing self-help and cleanup and all the wonderful things that we do in neighborhood development in order to try to create jobs or whatever is not a substitute for an import policy, a tariff policy, and a full employment policy. But it is in volunteering that I think that you begin to build a political awareness. I would hope that those wonderful people who do their volunteer work and see the tragedy of what human abandonment means, then also begin to mobilize and organize to bring about those changes. We also need to elect people who have worked hard to know what the people need and not what the institutions tell them that they ought to do. And so let me conclude by saying that some people say that this is the tough times. But I believe that tough times can also be the best times, because as we get out there in the streets and we begin to organize and help one another, we also begin to take a look at our flawed and failed policies and in other areas. And out of those tough times can come good times. Recently, right now, our cousin community of Fort Wayne is facing a terrible tragedy in terms of the rising floodwaters. And they turn to the boys and girls that I've just been talking about. And those wonderful boys and girls of Fort Wayne, Indiana, right now have been out working day and night, lifting over 250,000 sandbags, each weighing 50 pounds apiece. And those wonderful young people of Fort Wayne are the ones that are saving Fort Wayne, working under the direction of the Army Corps of Engineers. And young people get a terrible rap these days. Everybody implies that they don't care about anybody, and that they're either out there pursuing drugs, alcoholism, or promiscuous sex, and that they're not interested in their own future or anybody else's well-being. And yet, I don't believe that. And when we take a look at Fort Wayne and what they've done, I think they're an example of what I'm saying. I think that Fort Wayne, when it emerges from this great tragedy, will take a look at its young people very differently now than it did 10 days ago. And that they will see that the young people of Fort Wayne are the enormous resource that they are, and that the young people saved Fort Wayne, and now it's Fort Wayne's responsibility to save young people. And I think that that's something for us all to think about, and to think about then, too, what are the concrete ways that we can take the tough times and make them the better times and create a future for us all. Thank you very much for your hospitality.
Make a few announcements. You can sit down for a while and then I'll call you back. Thank you, Congresswoman Mikulski. Today at the City Club we are listening to an address by Congresswoman Barbara Mikulski of the 3rd District of Baltimore, Maryland rather. Her subject, the impact of the Reagan budget on women and children. In just a moment, we'll have our traditional question and answer session, but let me remind all of you once again in the audience here today, both in person and listening on radio and television, that the City Club is able to bring such speakers as Barbara Mikulski to this distinguished platform through the generosity of those of you who contribute to the City Club Foundation or who join the City Club as members. Your gifts to the City Club Foundation are tax deductible, and we call on you for your support. Just mail your check to the City Club headquarters here at 320 Superior Avenue, Cleveland 44114, or if you want further information, telephone the City Club. Our Executive Director, Alan Davis, will be glad to give you information, 621-0082. Incidentally, just for the benefit of those who have missed the rather dramatic and exciting news in the newspapers or on radio or television, we have reached a decision, tentatively in any case, to locate our new headquarters in the Citizens Building at 9th and Euclid sometime this summer. As you know, this property will be taken over for the site of the new headquarters of the Ohio complex, and it was through the devoted and persistent efforts of our treasurer, Nelson Weiss, and another member of the club, Stan Adelstein, that we were able to work out an excellent agreement to relocate to the Citizens Building at 9th and Euclid. And you'll be hearing further about that because negotiations are now underway to clear the decks for an agreement with Ohio that will enable us to build our new headquarters on the 2nd floor of that building. And those of us who have inspected that site, by the way, are enormously impressed with it. And I think all of you in the City Club and those of you who intend to join will find that this is the finest headquarters the club has ever had in its long and distinguished history. Today, as always, we have students with us from high schools of the Cleveland area who are taking part in our Living Seminar program, which we sponsor in cooperation with the Cleveland Board of Education. With us now are students from Bay, Beechwood, Charles F. Brush, Erie View Catholic, Euclid, Parma, St. Augustine, and West Tech. Would you young people kindly stand and receive our welcome? Next week, and I direct this particularly to you, our distinguished guest, you're cordially invited to attend next week's forum because the speaker on that occasion will be the Reverend Jerry Falwell. He's coming from his headquarters in Lynchburg, Virginia, to speak on the subject, What's Right with America? As you know, Mr. Falwell is president and founder of the Moral Majority. Now, I might tell you that the tickets for this address are for members only and have already been sold out, and those of you who have made reservations should pick them up ahead of time so that there will be no last-minute crush here next Friday when the Reverend Dr. Jerry Falwell descends upon us. Now for our question and answer session. We have two microphones, one in the forward part of the hall, manned by Alan Davis, our executive director, and in the rear of the room by Bob Cavano. Let's have our first question, please, for Congresswoman Barbara Mikulski.
Madam Congresswoman, this morning's paper reports that one of the chief defense industries in this country, General Electric, made $2.7 billion in 1981 and will not pay $1 of federal income tax. I don't know how many people in this room will be able to say that they will not pay $1 federal income tax.
Or that they made $2 billion.
How did this come about in the Congress, in the halls of Congress?
Well, it came about because of the adoption of the tax policy last summer, in which the philosophy was to implement the concept of supply-side economics. And what part of that tax policy was when we created a new commodity market in tax credits, in which mega corporations could buy each other's tax credits, so that a failing industry like steel could sell its tax credits to a profitable industry like General Electric. And it has turned out to be the biggest giveaway boondoggle. Well, actually, it's not a boondoggle at all. It works very efficiently if you believe in that philosophy. And that's how it happened. Now, I think even the supply-siders have decided that this was a terrible policy because it has actually prohibited, reinvestment in our industrial base. And Mr. Rostenkowski and the Ways and Means Committee are now taking a look at how we could deal with that and target it so that tax credits really be used in a way that does prompt reinvestment, which is something that we very much would want to do. But that's how it happened, and then you can say, well, how did they get away with it? And Congress was running actually they were like surfing last year, looking for these perfect waves that the president would put out on his proposals, and then they would ride the big crest in. If I seem cynical about it, it's because I am. And it was at that time when President Reagan's both budget proposals and tax proposals and his popularity were at an all-time high. And I venture to say that many votes that were cast last summer, people did not realize the full impact of what they were doing. A perfect one was on the tax cut was one, and there were some very good things in the tax cut. The increased tax thing for child care, marriage penalty, and so on. But they were centimils or whatever compared to this other stuff. The other thing is, and it goes along with what I was talking about, and this politics of reconceptualization. Last year when we voted on the Graham-Latta budget cut, Dennis can tell you, it was en bloc, so that no one thought in detail about the specifics. So for that reason, one of the things that was in there was that terrible thing we did to children whose parents were dead and were getting Social Security and are now not going to get Social Security benefits if they were seniors in high school and are not registered in college by May 1st. Some of us sniffed that out. And I must say, your most able watchdog on Social Security is Mary Rose Okar. I think she's got all 32 volumes memorized and can recite it back to you. But there is no way that a senior in high school can really honestly be in college by May 1st. I think the kids in Baltimore, like the kids in Cleveland, you finish high school in June with your class and you start college in September. And I think it's a rotten thing when one thinks about how good men and women plan for their families, insurance programs, and try to protect them, of which Social Security was a key component. And they assumed that their children would have Social Security if something happened to them and they were trying to get a higher education. And because we voted en bloc and not paid attention to the details, we did this horrendous thing to many of the families in our country. So, yes, ma'am. I'm sorry I didn't want to keep you waiting, but it's not taking it one thing at a time and picturing what you're doing that we do these rotten things. Yeah.
Granted that your programs are very important and necessary, the ones you mentioned, for helping people, and granted that we are way behind the Soviet Union in defense, what do you suggest would be the best method for cutting the deficit and for overcoming inflation?
Well, first of all, I don't necessarily agree that we're behind the Soviet Union in defense. We could take it by weapon analysis and examine that parity. But let's talk first about the deficit. When one talks first about the deficit, there are three ways that you can balance the budget. One is to cut programs. Is that somebody whispering in the back of the room? You can either cut your programs, you can raise your taxes, but there's another way that is often not talked about, and that's called full employment. Let me give you a concrete example. Every 1% of unemployment causes a Treasury loss of $25 billion, and both revenues going out for entitlement programs and lost revenues in terms of the contribution to taxes. So that if we cut our unemployment in this country by 3%, we could trim that deficit by $75 billion, and we would be doing an awful lot for our country. That's number one. So then the question becomes, how do we do that? I happen to believe that there need not be a trade-off between a strong national security and a strong peacetime economy. And the reason I say that is that we've got our priorities all wrong. When we talk about national defense, we are pursuing an erroneous policy of substituting high-tech gadgetry of questionable value, questionable reliability, but unquestionably high cost for a basic military system. Let's put that there for a minute. Well, let's come back to the fact that I believe that one of the reasons we were successful in World War II is that we had a peacetime economy that could be converted to a wartime economy if needed. We now don't have, we're basically eroding our peacetime economy that would have that kind of conversion ability. Ladies and gentlemen, we now don't have, think of this, we now don't have a garment industry to make the damn uniforms if we needed it. We now are destroying our steel industry by allowing the predatory practices of other countries to wipe out our jobs. We've now abandoned the whole ability to have a strong electronic capacity. We have abandoned in communities like mine a shipbuilding capacity in which we should have a very viable now merchant marine ability to engage in international trade. Well, now what I think we ought to do is have people making clothes, steel. Let's use some of our ingenuity and come up with a good old American car that works well and sells well because it works well and is efficient to run. Let's get into really taking a look at our trade policies and a variety of other things like that and begin to generate those jobs. And then if trouble comes in the world, we're ready to take it on. And we could analyze the Defense Department budget, but I bring to your attention the fact that when I said those airplanes don't have spare parts, I think all of you could tell from my speech that I would be called, I guess, a liberal in what was once those phrases when we used them. But I went to West Germany, and I toured the military Air Force bases because I wanted to see what was our status, and I wanted to see how G.I. Joe and Jane were living. Well, let me tell you, it was rotten. We asked men and women to join our military, and the conditions we then asked them to live under, and the salaries we now pay them, was god-awful. God-awful. Then when you go and you talk to the commanders of these military bases, we have the planes, but we didn't have the spark plugs, fan belts, all those basic kinds of things. There, though, they were right up on the frontier. And if they had to mobilize, they could keep themselves going for about 16 or 18 days, and then it was going to be tough munchies. Now, you can send a rapid deployment force anywhere you want around the world, but that, by the way, that used to be called the Marines when I was a kid. But you can send these rapid deployment forces, RDFs or whatever they're called, and once they get there, you have to follow it up with basic kinds of things. We don't even have the ships to get the stuff there, let alone a Navy. I mean, whether you're for or against the Navy is one thing, but you ought to be at least for a merchant marine that can engage in that. So when we ask about what we can do, I think that those are some of the things that we can do. We put our people to work, and we put our people to work in basic industry, and then we put our people to work in science, to begin to take a look at the new frontiers. I also think, and I'll stop here, is that we need better management of some of our industries. And I say that because right now I'm involved in a very bitter battle over the Clean Air Act. We're in a bitter battle over something called acid rain, which is when you emit sulfur dioxide, it mixes with the atmosphere and it creates acid. In the East Coast, it is killing farms, fishing, many other things. Now, industries want us to relax standards on acid rain. But you know what they do in Japan? They've got a process that all those major industries that emit sulfur dioxide, they capture that waste product, recycle it, and come up with hydrochloric acid, and they sell it as another means of making a profit. We spill it all over our environment and then try to get out of taking responsibility for the chemical crap that we're dumping on the fish and farms and other parts about that. But the Japanese are making a buck off of it, and we're killing our environment. Now, you tell me. I admire them. I mean, I think they are beating us. Yes.
I've asked this question before of a former congressperson and did not get a completely satisfactory answer. I'm wondering, Barbara, is there any possibility of a significant reduction in the sacred cow of the defense budget?
Well, I think so, and I think that, first of all, in this budget, there is no sacred cows. I would agree with Bob Dole on that one. And I think all programs will be evaluated. My concern, however, is that the votes will be keeping the high-tech expenditures and abandoning the funding for adequate personnel and a basic weaponry system that has a common sense use to it.
I share your concern about unemployment, but one thing I've noticed in some recent articles that we have an increasing number of husbands and wives that are working, both working 40 hours a week. And yet we have these other families that have no one employed in the family. Is this a sharing problem, that we aren't really sharing our work properly in the country? And if this is so, does the federal government have anything that they can do about this to get a little more equalization of the work that we do have?
Well, are you implying that a woman is taking a job away from a man and she ought to stay home? Is that?
No, I am definitely not implying that.
Is that
what
you were asking me?
I would suggest, though, that could we restructure our job so both the man and the wife, or the husband and the wife, could work 30 hours a week and maybe have 60 hours and give some of that work to some of the people that do not have work at all?
Well, I think in some jobs that's an interesting approach, but it's essentially what we have in this country is that it's not so much time management shifting as it is really the basic idea of a job at all to be shared. So that when one looks at some of the areas that I've just outlined, it's not whether that job could be shared, it's whether that job exists at all. And I'll come back to what I just said, that we really do need a reindustrialization policy for this country. Our country's infrastructure and industry is getting old. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to die. It means it's going to be rebuilt, and we could put an awful lot of people going to work doing that. Let's just take a look at the roads and bridges problem. It is now a national scandal. And by the way, I don't know if you know that that Eisenhower created the interstate highway system as a national defense measure. Did you know that? So that we could all get around faster if we needed to. Now, and that wasn't a bad idea. And that's what I meant about a peacetime military thing. Now, those roads are coming apart. Now, I know in the State of the Union address, the President said that the business of government was not potholes. But as a city councilwoman, I can tell you the business of government is potholes. And it's also a very dangerous situation. Now, the funding for just the improvement of our transportation system, whether it's railroad tracks, whether for freight, whether it's roads or bridges, could put an awful lot of people to work. Every one person that works creates jobs for others. I talk a lot about industrialization, but you know that when that steel worker is employed, that means jobs in restaurants, insurance, retail clothing, and it just is a whole multiplier effect. And I think that's number one. Number two is then to revitalize our aging industry. But let's take a look at what's old, what's worn out, and then let's target our efforts to rebuild it.
Now, if you have any information about the alternative budget proposed by the Congressional Black Caucus, and if so, what is your opinion of it?
I think that they've just really begun to formulate it, and I haven't had a chance to take a look at it. However, I can just say that historically, the Congressional Black Caucus has always come up with very good ideas. And last year, their budget, which I supported, was a balanced budget, which I thought was terrific. So I can't comment on the specifics, but we'll be looking forward to that.
Representative, last night I had, in a book, I found a report that you had filed with the House Foreign Affairs Committee regarding a trip to El Salvador in 1981. So I want to ask you a little bit about El Salvador. Regarding the people, call them refugees, call them emigres, who want to come from El Salvador to the United States in great numbers, and who are presently, those who reach here, are being sent back as illegal aliens. In contrast to Polish people who are coming from Poland and being allowed in the same line with Haitians who are being denied and being tossed out. If you were the President of the United States and had control of this, what would your immigration policy be at the present time on El Salvador?
I would stop the military aid so that there wouldn't be refugees. Well, that was not a facetious answer, sir, because I believe that the refugees that have come are fleeing a brutal, brutal situation. You read that report, and when I was in Central America, went to the border, talked to the refugees, and yesterday the Congressional Caucus on Women's Issues met with Assistant Secretary Enders just on the issues that you've raised. To talk about the unfair and inequitable treatment of refugees and their position that these refugees are economic. Our position was then, if they're fleeing for economic reasons, then why are we arming the Duarte government? In other words, we are part of the problem for creating refugees. We could not get anywhere in that discussion in that particular forum. So we will continue to pursue our policy of stopping military aid in El Salvador and pushing for the political negotiations, particularly along the lines that the President of Mexico has offered. I myself am engaged now, along with 14 others, in a lawsuit suing the President, Secretary Weinberger, and Secretary Haig, saying that they violated the War Powers Act by sending the military advisors without congressional approval, and that they violate the Foreign Assistance Act, which has an amendment that we cannot give foreign aid where there's been a gross violation of human rights. And I do believe that that is the condition in Central America based on my own personal observations. But refugees are coming because they feel that they're being persecuted or that they could be killed. So that's why I'm saying let's stop the military aid and let's begin to push for some type of political solution that then is coupled with strong economic aid. That also would hold true for Haiti. Haiti is a sad, desperate little country, and we have found that if we could begin to move the economic aid in a different direction, people might not be fleeing because they might not be so desperate. And that's what I would do if I were president. I'd like to just say something, if I could. I know this community is extremely interested in the El Salvador situation because two of the religious women that were killed are from this community. I'd like to comment not only on your own congressional activity there, but I would like to thank you for sending Archbishop Hickey to Washington. He has been wonderful on this matter, testifying in Congress, working with the bishops of America. He's also made his presence known and his concerns felt on a variety of social issues. So we are very pleased that not only do you send us good elected officials, but your ecclesiastical representation was most welcome, and we'd like to thank you for that.
Even though we are again beginning to talk about workfare with all of its erroneous assumptions, and even though more and more women are working out of economic necessity because we know that a very large percentage of the working women come from homes that have an income of less than $12,000 a year, our provisions for child care have not kept pace. And the number has already outgrown the ability to make private arrangements. Do you foresee in the near future our having an adequate public child care policy?
No. Absolutely not. And the reason I say that is twofold. We'll be asked that of Reverend Falwell when he comes next week. And I'll tell you why. One, you'll be told that we can't afford it, and second, that it is really one of the most vociferous ways that the right wing has organized. This wonderful pro-family organization has been in the area of actively opposing any federal child care daycare programs, saying that it is government intervention into the life of the family, and that it is some type of big brother plot to get a hold of the minds and bodies of little American boys and girls. And they've been very effective in communicating that, and I think you ought to ask him that when he comes. I think it's awful, and I think it's dangerous. Before I was a congressperson, my own background and city council person, my background was that of a social worker. I worked for Associated Catholic Charities and the Department of Social Services in Baltimore. I was a child abuse and child neglect worker. So I know what it means when there's not adequate daycare and the dangers to children, what we used to call latchkey children back in the old days. And I see that the failure to provide for children adequately is very, very, very dangerous. Yes?
In the past, and presently too, there's been a disparity between the perceived opinion of the public on issues like freedom of choice, between the population and the opinion of the legislators and congresspeople. Now we're told that people seem to think that Reagan is very popular in spite of polls. How can we reduce that kind of disparity and get office holders to act in a more realistic manner?
Well, support the good guys and the good gals, but I also believe, and I have a few I'd like to mention, but also I believe that for those of you, that one of the best ways is that when congresspeople are home on weekends and district work periods, ask for them to meet with you and get them out to the programs, whether it's out to the factories and in union halls where the unemployed, bring them to that daycare center that's going to close, introduce them to that wonderful double dipper, that 9-year-old who wants both a school lunch program and maybe food stamps. And I think that it goes back to what I said. You make the personal political. You show it in very concrete terms. Let me just conclude, though, because they gave me a little sign, with the story about Reverend Falwell and myself. I debated him on Nightline on women's issues. And you'll find Reverend Falwell is very articulate, very charming, and he told me how he was absolutely for the ladies. And I raised the issue of the Equal Rights Amendment. He said he was for the ladies, and he felt that they should be protected by the law, but we should really do it one law at a time and not be included in the Constitution. And I said, well, let me give you another argument for that, Reverend Falwell. Suppose the year is 1860, and Harriet Tubman went to Abraham Lincoln, and she outlined to Abraham Lincoln the plight of her people. And Abraham Lincoln would have said to Harriet Tubman, "Oh, Harriet," or "Oh, Miss Tubman, I'm for the emancipation, but I'm not for the proclamation. Let's just do it one plantation at a time."
In the last presidential campaign, probably the key issue was wild runaway inflation. And the cause of that, of course, is not the defense budget because, as the Secretary of the Navy told us last week, the Carter administration starved the military over a course of 4 years. And would you agree that the cause of inflation at that time was the irresponsible hands on the federal purse strings in Congress? And my question, I guess, is what was your role in the fight against inflation? And I ask a second question, and that is, you made some reference to receiving Social Security benefits. With all due respect, is it not true that you and the other members of Congress pay no Social Security taxes, and that you get without paying a dime in contributions, you get a very fat pension program that would be the envy of the whole world?
No, it's not the envy of the whole world. But first of all, prior to becoming a member of Congress in 1976, I had worked ever since 1958 and had contributed to the Social Security system. So I have been, I've been contributing ever since I worked part-time in my father's grocery store, selling bologna. There are some who might say I still sell bologna, but I've been a contributor. Second, let me say this. Members of Congress do have a pension plan for which we do make personal contributions. So you should just know that. But in terms of dealing with inflation has many, many, many causes to it. Some would say that one of the causes for inflation is the enormous deficit. I think I outlined for you some of the ways to deal with that deficit that I think is positive and progressive and leads to hope and not heartbreak. And I hope you like that philosophy, and if you don't, well, you get another one next week and you take your choice.
Thank you, Congresswoman Barbara Mikulski. The City Club foreman for today is adjourned.